Dominion is finally here. I'm very excited to start my Stormcast, but first, I couldn't help but notice the resemblance of this shaman and a certain warlock from the Warcraft universe. Stay tuned to see how I convert this fantastic model into Gul'dan. While this model is already 90% of the way to looking like Gul'dan, it still has a strong swamp shaman aesthetic, so I'd like to add some parts that more closely fit the theme. Thingiverse is a free website for sharing 3D model STL files that are used for 3D printing. A quick search for Gul'dan has found this model here. There are definitely some great parts I can use on this model, so I'm going to download the files and open them in Chittybox. From here I'm going to sort the bits into pieces I could use and remove the pieces that I don't want to use. If you haven't seen Chittybox before, it is what's known as a slicer. It lets you prepare STL files for printing. Now I've brought in a model that I know is the right scale for Warhammer models. This is just for reference, so that I can see that the Gul'dan files are way too big and I need to scale them down. I also like to look at the sizes of the parts and measure with a ruler or tape measure on the shaman miniature so that I can visualize if the parts will work or not. Next step is to add supports to each of these parts. The parts are going to be printed in resin, which means they'll be printed upside down on a metal plate. If the supports aren't very good, then the pieces will just get pulled off of the plate while they're printing. With this piece here, the teeth are going to be a problem, as they are very tiny and hard to support. Sometimes the best thing to do is to change the rotation of the object so that delicate pieces don't need supports at all. It takes a bit of time to correctly rotate and support each piece, but the effort really pays off when the parts are printed and you only have to do minimal cleanup work. Once everything is prepared, it is time to slice. Slicing breaks the prepared project into layers. You can see the layers by moving the bar on the right over here. The printer works one layer at a time to build up your printed objects. So what the slicer really does is take a 3D object and turn it into a series of black and white JPEGs per layer. The white area showing what to print, the black showing what not to print. Once this is saved onto a USB stick, I take it into my Anycubic Photon Mono SE printer, which has already been prepared for printing. Plug it in, look through the print menu until I find the file. I like to number my prints so it's easy to find them. Start the print and the build plate will move into the vat and start printing the first layer. On the screen I can see which layer it is currently printing and estimated duration so I know when it will be complete. Once complete, the build plate will rise to the top and you can see the printed parts hanging from it. From here I've put on my nitrile gloves and a mask, remove the build plate and pop the parts off with a metal spatula. Then gave the parts a bath in isopropyl alcohol to clean the uncured resin off the surface of the part. Now I'm going to remove the parts from their supports while they are clean but not properly cured, because once they are properly cured it'll be more difficult and higher risk of damage to remove them from the supports. Next, each of the parts are properly cured under UV light for a few minutes. Now begins the process of making sure I got the scale right and supergluing the parts to the model. For this I'm also referencing photos of Gul'dan from Google image search to make sure the placement works properly. The glue I'm using is Loctite. Any super glue is fine, but I really like it because it has a long precision nozzle, which also seems to be the only super glue nozzle I've found that doesn't clog itself or glue itself shut after a few uses. That's all the 3D printed parts glued. I also added some spare skulls to the staff to look more like Gul'dan staff from the Warcraft movie. I only added one shoulder pad, as it doesn't look right on the outstretched arm and really doesn't even need it. So there it is. The horns on the back of the model may have looked a little better without the bone spikes that are coming out of the back, but I felt mixing both would make it look a little more interesting. The biggest issue remaining is the base. Those reeds are very swampy and I feel it needs some elevation to make it look more like the barren red hills near the Dark Portal as this is where Gul'dan will likely be sharing his green demon blood. I snipped the reeds and used some cork to build up the base, so Gul'dan has a bit of a hill to stand on. Normally I would pin the model to the cork, but the tab that was already under the model will do a good enough job at holding it firm. Now over in the spray booth, I'm giving the base a coat of black, then a zenithal highlight using Liquitex white ink. This will give a great starting point to start laying down colour on the model. But first I'm going to coat the model with a layer of matte varnish. White ink does not work like white paint and will run into the recesses if you don't seal the model before painting it. For the orc skin, I'm going to use Vallejo Goblin Green. This is by far my favourite orc colour. It's also nice and thin right out of the bottle, so it's perfect over a zenithal highlight. To base coat the cloak, I'm using Rhinox hide. This will give it a nice dark reddish brown as a base. Next I spent a bit of time whiting out areas that I wanted to be a lighter colour than the zenithal, or areas that I intend to use contrast paint or the ultimate Fellblood paint. By ultimate Fellblood paint, I of course mean Tesseract Glow. This paint is highly translucent, so it works well over white. It also dries darker in recesses, which means less work to do in order to make it look just right. I haven't done any shading or highlighting on the liquid in the bowl, yet it looks just right with a single coat. You'll also notice I coated the skulls with a white and the horns and back piece with Ushanti bone, then covered the lot in Skeleton Horde contrast paint. This is by far my favourite combination for bone and skulls, and it'll look fantastic after dry brushing Screaming Skull to add back a bit more highlight. I've also coated the ground with Doombull Brown, so I can properly glue the model in place without being challenged with painting in the shadowed recess areas later. The staff was then painted with Wildwood contrast paint, and I did the extra bottles of Fellblood in Tesseract Glow. The shoulders were done with Gunmetal Grey, and dry brush with Stormhost Silver. These were the contrast paints I used most, and this was everything else I used in getting to this point. This is where I ended the first day and waited for the model to dry properly before continuing. I started the following day by doing some more white highlights to be covered with Tesseract Glow as object source lighting. I also highlighted some glow areas on the shoulder where runes would appear, like the in-game version of Gul'dan. To bring all the elements of the base together, I'm trying Armageddon Dust. This seems like it will be a good texture for a barren environment. Crackle paint would also have worked for this, but this is all I had at the time. I put this aside to dry for a few hours and then coated it with Doombull Brown, which has a nice red colour to it. I then tried highlighting with Bugman's Glow, but it was too close to Doombull in volume, which didn't give the base the feel I was going for. So I tried something a little riskier and used Luganov Orange, which I think worked pretty well. Then I covered all that with Agrak's Earthshade to add some detail and tie all the colours together. This should look fairly effective once it is dry, but now it looks more like chocolate cake. I wanted to add some dead grass to the base to give it some interest, but I didn't have any flock or grass that looked exactly what I wanted, and the local hobby shop was going to be closed for 2 days. However, I did find this Vallejo Fantasy Tough Pink. Well, yes, it is pink. It also has a fair bit of orange in it, so I figured this might actually work. I wasn't too sure after placing the first one, but by the time I was finished placing tufts, I'd fallen in love with this combination. I think these tufts look fantastic on the reddy brown dirt, and also a good contrast for the dark figure with lots of green and bone colour highlights. While I started this project with the intent of just doing Gul'dan, I'm now tempted to see how I can make a full force of Warcraft themed Cruel Boys with the rest of this kit. If that is something that interests you, show me with a comment and consider subscribing so you'll see when I make future videos on the Cruel Boys. All that is left to do at this point is varnish the model so that we can seal in the colour and enjoy it. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been enjoyable for you. Don't forget to tell me which Auroch model you would like to see me paint next in my Warcraft themed army by letting me know in the comments. Thank you.